for joining us today. I see people are starting to come in. So it's not quite 12 yet, so we're waiting for a few more people to come in. Hopefully we'll be good to go around 12, but if not, we'll give it a few more minutes for the rest of our attendees to join. Okay, so good afternoon to everyone who's joined so far. We're still going to wait a little bit more for some additional attendees to hop on. Maybe around 12:05. If we haven't got everyone by then, we'll get started. Thank you all for joining us today, though.
Tim, do we have attendees on yet, or is it just us? Okay.
We have a few attendees. I'm gonna give it till 12:05 to get started, just till we have a few more attendees to hop on.
Okay, well, I'm gonna go ahead and hide my camera since I'm not really one of the presenters.
Right,
but let me know if you need me.
All right, thank you. Hi, Nneka. We just want to give it another few minutes for a few more attendees to hop on. I'm thinking around maybe 12:05 we can get started. Another minute or so. Okay, thank you all for your patience. I think we'll get started now. Thank you all for joining us today for our training, estate planning, and racial economic equity. So firstly, my name is Timothy Chance. I am the Tangled Title Attorney at Maryland Volunteer Lawyer Service. Today, you'll be hearing from Nneka N'namdi, the Executive Director of Fight Blight Bmore, and myself. So Nneka's going to provide an overview on blight, the trauma it causes, and the impact upon generational wealth transfer. And I'm going to be exploring estate planning as a tool to confront the devaluation of wealth in communities of color. So before I pass it off to Nneka, I just want to let everyone know that this is being recorded to be accessed later. All right, with no further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Nneka, and everyone should be able to see the slides. So Nneka, when you're ready, just to go to the next slide, just let me know.
Sure.
Hop right over.
Good morning, everyone. Again, I'm Nneka N'namdi. I am the creator of Fight Blight Bmore and one of the co-creators of the SOS Fund, in addition to being the Director of Community Development for the Living Well Center for Social and Economic Vibrancy. And today, as Tim noted, we're here to talk about blight. It's how it, how it was formed, what its impact is on communities, specifically communities in the Black Butterfly, and what we are doing about it, how we can use estate planning to, be a part of the repair package. Next slide. So when we're talking about blight, we're really focused on, this slide is actually about me, enough about me, keep going. Blight, when we talk about blight, we're talking about the presence and concentration of especially in concentrations of vacant, abandoned, dilapidated, underutilized, and misutilized properties in community. The first two are rather self-explanatory, but the first three are self-explanatory. The second, the fourth and fifth, I'm going to give you examples of, so you can kind of see what we mean. In terms of underutilized properties, Baltimore has many school buildings, right? They're on the surplus school list because of Baltimore's dwindling population. From 1950 till today, Baltimore has lost about 600,000 people. So we were at 1.2 million people in the 1950s. Down to 670,000 today. And so that means a smaller population of school children. And so Baltimore City Public Schools combine schools, they close schools, and they're left with these buildings. So these buildings are underutilized buildings in our community because oftentimes they just sit vacant until they're sold, right? And then misutilized properties. So these are properties in communities that may be being used, but they're not being used to the highest good or to the good of the community. So for example, if you look at the stretch of streets, a stretch of Pennsylvania Avenue from Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard to North Avenue, though all of Old West Baltimore, which that section of street cuts through, has no full service grocery store. That stretch of street has no less than 5 liquor stores, right? And so, yes, we understand that being able to purchase liquor stores or liquor or other convenience items is something that many communities want. But when you don't have a full service grocery store, you certainly shouldn't have 5 liquor stores in that same catchment. And so that's what we mean when we mean misutilized properties. Next slide. Oftentimes, when we start to talk about blight, in context mostly of the 17,000 vacant houses and then the other 16,000 vacant lots in the city, we miss the historical thread, right? We miss how we got here. And so to give you 500 years of history in 5 minutes, if you look at this map, the dark area in the beginning around the waterfront is the original borders of what was called Baltimore town, right? And then you see from 1817 to 1898 to 1910, you see the border of Baltimore growing. Of course, the population and the level of industry in Baltimore is growing during that period of time. Curiously, Baltimore is the city in the period of enslavement with the largest population of free Africans living alongside enslaved Africans in anywhere in America. And so folks live together, ethnic minorities from Central and Eastern Europe lived alongside Black folks during those period of time, during that period of time in little ethnic enclaves around the water. And so those ethnic enclaves continue to grow. And curiously around 1910, at the same time that you have the housing infamous Ordinance 610 come into being, you see the size of the city being sealed, right? So effectively limiting the growth and limiting the expansion of Baltimore, though you continue to have ethnic minorities coming from Central and Eastern Europe, and then African Americans doing a great migration out of the South into Baltimore in this kind of tightly constrained borders. Next slide. And Ordinance 610 is really key because it sets the stage for what we see in the hyper-segregation that we see in Baltimore today. That ordinance was passed in 1910, and it basically said if a block was predominantly white, no additional Black people could move on that block, or if the block was conversely predominantly Black, no additional white folks could move onto that block. And it is the first ordinance of its type in all of America, and it gives the foundation for how Baltimore continues even today to segregate itself. And in terms of blight, what you'll see is those neighborhoods with predominantly Black populations almost exclusively from 1910 into now are also the neighborhoods that are deemed to be or actually are blighted. So the map on the left shows the concentration of properties deemed blighted in the 1950s. And then if you look at the redlining map on the right, we'll all kind of be familiar with, this is the map that determined where people could receive federally backed mortgages, where mortgages could be issued. And those areas in red were not able to receive those federally backed mortgages. Those areas are also the same areas that were blighted in 1950. And they're also the same neighborhoods with predominantly Black populations. Next slide. Skip this slide. We'll be here all day if we watch that. But so really what you start to see in the 1950s and 60s is federal policy, but also state and local policy around blight remediation. You start to begin to see those policies displacing Black people and Black communities using, urban renewal. And so one of the great examples of that is surrounding, this is the Baltimore Harbor in the 1950s, I believe. And you'll notice that there are homes much closer to the harbor than they are today. Many of the folks that lived around the waterfront still in that period of time were African Americans. There was that were displaced for both the construction of the harbor pavilions and the changing of the road structure, but also through the construction of 395, right, into downtown. Next slide. And those displacements by, via the highway system or the Federal Highway Act, which you can see here in this display that shows us the plan for Baltimore's highway system. And we know that most of this highway never happened. So the JFX happens and the failed I-70 spur, which we now call the highway to nowhere, happened. And again, these highway systems typically cut through Black neighborhoods or low income neighborhoods. And in the case of the highway to nowhere and the JFX, in both cases, Black neighborhoods were heavily impacted. In the case of the highway to nowhere, which is one of probably the greatest construction follies in all of American highway, in all of the American highway system, it resulted in 1,000 homes and businesses, mostly Black owned, in Harlem Park and Poppleton being destroyed. And so that begins the decline of Old West Baltimore that we see today. Harlem Park has a blight level of, or a vacancy level of something like 30% of its units. That begins with the displacement that was caused by this federal highway policy. Next slide. So you can see what happens when you start to have federal policy and state policy for development, displacing particular communities while investing in other communities. So this is a aerial view of the harbor when it was completed in 1982, which I think in 1980, either in its inaugural year or in the year following, had more visitors than Disney World. So you can see there was a lot of money made, there was a lot of money invested, but those investments displaced Black homeowners in places in and around the harbor, and caused a disinvestment in Black neighborhoods in East Baltimore, specifically around Old Town Mall, and in West Baltimore in places like Harlem Park and on Pennsylvania Avenue, where you start to see the decline of the commercial corridors in Black communities right around the time that many of these infrastructure investments are made by the city into downtown, into the harbor, into One Charles Plaza, into the development of the Morris Mechanic Theater. Next slide. And so, how do we get to this level of concentrated blight in the Black butterfly? These are all of the factors. So you have the declining population of white folks who simply refuse to live in neighborhoods or send their children to school with Black people. And also, but that was abutted by, or that was supported by the ability of GIs post-World War II, white GIs, to get federally backed mortgage loans, which were not available to Black GIs. So then you also have the Black following, which is in the years post the Civil Rights Movement, Black people who have been able to acquire means and now have the legalized mechanisms or the apparent legalized mechanisms for segregation removed, also move to places like Woodlawn as a result of Social Security opening up a housing office inside of its new headquarters in Woodlawn to help Black employees be able to purchase homes in Woodlawn, right? So you see a Black following out of the city. So you see depopulation. Of course, the war on poverty and the war on drugs, which were essentially wars on Black people. That causes mass incarceration, that causes folks to, lose their lives quite literally and lose their minds. You also have the deindustrialization of the port. So right at the same time, many Black people are able to start getting unionized jobs. You start to see corporate America move these semi-skilled and low-skilled labor jobs to the global South. So instead of being able to exploit when they were no longer able to directly or as openly exploit Black people labor in the Americas, they go to Black and brown people in other parts of the world to exploit their labor. Disinvestment, which we talked about in decisions surrounding the harbor, the Morris Mechanic Theater, surrounding the federal highway system. These are dollars, public dollars, that were used to create investments in ways that would not and did not directly impact the lived experience and the built environment in Black communities in Baltimore. And that talks about urban renewal too, slum clearance. So Baltimore in the 1950s and 60s cleared a lot of what they called slums. For example, in Harlem Park and Upton, there were alley streets. Baltimore is famous for these alley houses in streets behind much larger houses. And so it was, many of those houses were in poor condition. And instead of the city investing money and helping property owners come up to code, they demolished those houses and created inner block parks, but then failed to invest dollars in programming and in upkeep of those parks. So many of those parks, although they are city owned now, are in poor condition and are not used. And of course, there's property tax assessments and collections, which I could go on for hours and days about, but basically the way properties are assessed in the Black Butterfly is extremely suspect. And we know that the tax sale, the way it is applied is predatory, specifically to vulnerable homeowners. And then of course, along with urban renewal is this condemnation and demolition, which we see a lot of today. If we look at the governor's Project Core, to demolish, the idea is to condemn and demolish properties that are blighted. But if you don't immediately have, or at least in the short term, have a plan to bring those properties back into use in community, what you simply have is a vacant lot. And a vacant lot, not green, not maintenance, not available or accessible to community to use, is blight as well. Next slide. So this just shows you the hyper-segregation developed from the 1970s in Baltimore to 2010. And we can clearly see the development of the white owl and the Black Butterfly as described by Dr. Lawrence Brown. Next slide. And so when we take a look at the maps, everything that we could see from that 1950 blight map and from the 1950 residential housing security redlining maps, we see the impacts, we see the outcomes of those things in our population, where people live, and the population of people that are unemployed, which is what the map on the right signifies. Next slide. We see it in lead paint violations. Most, if you look at this map, they're about 4, 5, 6, less than 20 notices inside the white owl. The predominance of them are, in the Black Butterfly. The map to the right is where violence occurs around transportation hubs. So students who have to catch the bus to school, this is what they encounter: violence just trying to get to school. So when we wonder why some children don't show up to school, these are reasons why. You see much of that is in the Black Butterfly as well. Next slide. Where we bank. The pink tabs, so the pink pins, are bank branches. Most of them exist in the central, in the lower portion of the white L in central Baltimore, and in neighborhoods like Canton and Fells Point. And those are the same neighborhoods, if you look at the map on the right, that have full service grocery stores. In fact, Southeast Baltimore has no less than seven full service grocery stores. While if you look at full service grocery stores, you don't even have that many in almost all of West Baltimore. So these are this is the impact. Like, you can see what happens when the municipality specifically doesn't invest resources into particular neighborhoods. Next slide. COVID-19 hits, right? And so that literally kind of pulls the eyes, pulls the mask off in a lot of ways. And what we have here is housing insecurity, cases of levels of housing insecurity overlaid with levels of COVID-19 cases, which makes sense. Where people are housing insecure, having to couch surf or be overcrowded in houses that are not suited for the number of people, you're going to have a greater spread of COVID-19 because people aren't able to properly social distance. Next slide. And so simply the outcomes are lowered life expectancy, more concentrations of blight, less property value, less home equity in neighborhoods with problems with blight, and lowered city revenues. Next slide. I mean, we could talk the numbers, but the human toll is so important. And I put the slide in just to note what one of our elders, Dr. Coco, said, which is that if a child has to walk past 29 properties, vacant properties on their way to school, they've already failed the first grade. And it's not because it's anything innately wrong with the child, but because the conditions that the child will have to navigate in order to get an education are almost insurmountable. Next slide. The impacts are simple. It destroys community. It displaces people. It limits and damages wealth creation and generational wealth transfer. Specifically, Tim is going to go more into that. And then it erodes the responsibility and rights of property owners to keep their properties in good condition. That is what underpins issues with blight. The next slide. And so, my mother always said, don't come to me without a problem, without solutions. And so these are among the solutions that, we have kind of envisioned, And the center of that is Baltimore Neighborhood Reparations and Reparations Fund and Social Equity Bond. But there are different levels and pieces to it. Next slide. The solution that, the Stop Oppressive Seizures Fund has really kind of been one of the solutions that we have really been focused on, is how to use estate planning to ensure that what wealth, specifically Black homeowners, were able to achieve by buying a home, right, on contract loans, with, other predatory lending instruments, being steered and experiencing blockbusting, how we can use estate planning to kind of mitigate those things, those challenges to Black homeownership, and to ensure that, one, those elders can age in space, but two, that when they transition, that those assets, whatever their value is passed on to the next generation. And as we do more of that, it helps to uplift the value of the entire community, because it keeps people in those homes, right? It helps to people to start to mobilize as community to fight against some of the policies like tax sale that we know are problematic, but specifically how we can be using generational wealth or estate planning to transition these assets over. And I will pass it on to Tim.
All right, thank you, Nneka. So you just got a chat. So I just want to, were people able to see the slides? I got the chat from one member that they weren't able to see the slides. No. Well, yeah, I don't know if you have the chat. Okay, you see the current slide. Okay, all right, great. I'm sorry, I just didn't want to have a fiasco where slides weren't being seen. All right, so thank you so much, Nneka. I'm going to switch over the PowerPoint. And while I do that, I just want to take the chance to, I forgot to mention this, but we're going to have time after for some questions. But if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat, or you can also use the Q&A section. We'll be monitoring both. So bear with me for a second while I switch over. Okay, can everyone see this?
Yep, we can see it.
All right, awesome. Thank you. Okay. Okay, so just once again, my name is Tim Chance. I'm the Tangled Title attorney with Maryland Volunteer Lawyer Service. And before diving in, I just want to give a quick overview of MVLS, the work that we do. So MVLS connects Marylanders who are facing economic hardships with volunteer attorneys and community partners to deliver free civil legal assistance, because we believe ultimately that there should be justice for all, not just those who can afford it. So MVLS uses pro bono representation to help close the justice gap in Maryland, and at the same time, we're seeking to close and to close the racial wealth gap as well. So we offer representation in these 6 areas of civil law. So there's estate planning and administration, which we'll be discussing today. There is family law matters such as housing and divorce. Such as divorce and custody. Then we have housing matters such as foreclosure and tax sale, consumer matters such as bankruptcy, income tax controversies, and criminal record expungements. Go to check this chat to make sure that we don't have any issues. Okay, so yeah, we can. So I think we're going to just save the questions for the end. So we'll address this. Thank you. So that is a quick primer for who MVLS is as an organization. But I just want to give some background on what brought racial equity and estate planning to our attention and what caused us to prioritize this. So we began to see many foreclosure proceedings where we saw clients who had tangled titles and they were facing a significant barrier in homeownership. So tangled title issues arise when a person has a legal interest in their home. So they are the de facto owner. They are paying the property taxes. They're paying the mortgage if there's still a mortgage. They're making any repairs to keep the property in an inhabitable condition. So for all intents and purposes, they are the owner, but their name is not on the deed to the property. And because these people have tangled titles, many of these people have tangled titles because they are living in a family home that's still titled in a deceased relative's name. And without estate planning or probate, the property title has never changed. And tangled title issues create serious consequences for our clients. So without their name on the deed, they cannot access property tax credits, repair programs, or even transfer property to future generation. And these are resources that would help them avoid tax sale and maintain housing stability. And this is a citywide problem affecting the most vulnerable homeowners in Baltimore City. Just last year alone, in 2020, over 3,500 owner-occupied properties went into tax sale and are at risk of foreclosure. Many of these homeowners are Black homeowners whose house represents not only their home, but generally the one asset that they are going to be able to pass on to the next generation. And currently, as of 2019, the median typical Black household at 12.7% of the wealth of the typical white household. And with this wealth gap, Black families are so much more susceptible to losing their home to foreclosure, tax sale, or mortgage foreclosure. And that obviously destabilizes that particular family because they face the very real possibility of homelessness. It also destabilizes the community. And these stats are from 2 years ago. So these problems have only been exacerbated by COVID-19. So at MVLS, we recognize this trend among our clients that tangled titles often result in the extraction of wealth in the Black communities here in Baltimore. But I also just want to provide a brief historical rundown of some systemic barriers to wealth building in these communities, both locally and nationwide. So Nneka touched on a lot of these. This isn't a comprehensive list, but these are just some of the ones that come to mind when I'm trying to approach this estate planning through the lens of racial equity. So first, redlining. So Nneka touched on this. Just redlining is the process of wealth denial in Black communities. So those neighborhoods that have been coded red did not receive those federally backed loans, while those white neighborhoods that have been coded green did. This practice is still ongoing. Black homeowners in Baltimore continue to be denied access to capital for mortgages. Actually, the National Community Reinvestment Coalition documented redlining by private banks here in Baltimore as recently as 10 years ago. And without access to these federally backed loans, Black neighborhoods were ravaged by predatory lending. So Black potential home buyers would be charged higher interest rates than their white counterparts. And just as with redlining, this is not some bygone relic of the past. Many national banks, including Wells Fargo and Bank of America, steered Black homebuyers towards predatory loans in Black neighborhoods in the period leading up to the housing bubble in 2007. And these same lenders who charge Black homebuyers significant surcharges in their mortgages also finance blockbusters. So that's where a fear-mongering real estate broker or agent would create panic amongst white homeowners, essentially telling them that if more Black families moved into the neighborhood, the values of their homes would plummet. And they would advise the white homeowners to sell the property as quickly as possible. And after the property was sold at a low price, it was then subsequently sold back at significantly inflated rates to Black buyers. And there's the restrictive covenants, deeds which banned Black ownership of homes in neighborhoods like Roland Park, Guilford, Washington, and Ashburn. And then he also touched on the GI Bill, which allowed white veterans to buy homes in the suburbs and accumulate wealth after World War II, while Black veterans were excluded from taking advantage of its benefits. The GI Bill, redlining, restrictive covenants, these all result in a pattern of segregation that persists today across the US. These are policies that limit the abilities for communities of color to accumulate intergenerational wealth. They create, they maintain, and they exacerbate poverty within these communities. And in this way, poverty has been racialized, and race and class are inextricably linked. So this brings us to where we are today. So nationwide, among middle-aged families, Black homeownership is 22 percentage points lower than white families. And here in Baltimore City, while overall homeownership is at 47%, Black homeownership is at 42%. And it's thinking through the lens of these systemic impediments and barriers from previous slide and from Nneka's presentation that must remain at the forefront of our minds when we're approaching estate planning for our clients in these communities. So I tried to break this down into three major prongs. So we'll start with context when you're talking to your clients about estate planning with a racial equity lens. With context, we're just looking at the systemic racism and impediments to building wealth and owning a home. So one thing I think is imperative to keep in mind during every step of estate planning with our clients is the systemic context. So for many of our clients, their home is the only major asset, and it's critical that it's protected. Our clients didn't acquire these homes in a vacuum. Oftentimes they were confronted with the full brunt of these systems, and obtaining the home in itself was a heroic effort and an unbelievable victory, honestly. So when assisting our clients, it's crucial that instead of viewing the home as just as a piece of real estate with monetary value, recognize its emotional and sentimental value as well. The home is the emotional cornerstone for families. Our clients have raised their families in their homes, their lifetimes of memories, and it becomes extremely important that the home and the memories that were created in that home stay in the family for future generations, especially after the effort that it took to create those memories. And I think the name of our program, My Home, My Deed, My Legacy, is so appropriate because by properly valuing our clients' intangible assets, i.e. their legacies, we can more effectively protect their material assets, such as the home. So it's all interconnected. So I'm mostly focusing on like the home, the family home, but it's also good to keep that non-monetary valuation in mind for all of the major estate planning documents, specifically like the power of attorney, which protects the client's assets if they become incapacitated, and then the will, which protects the client's assets after their death, including assets which may not immediately jump to mind when first considering estate planning, such as the family Bible. So again, just those emotional cornerstones. I'm repeatedly coming back to this point, but it's critical that we keep this context at the forefront of our minds. Our clients overcame impossible odds to become homeowners, and we need to remain cognizant of the detrimental wealth extraction that has occurred and will continue to occur without estate planning and more systemic change. So the next prong I want to talk about is sympathetic awareness. So understanding your client's backstory and their goals. So just as it's important to keep the broader context of wealth extraction in mind, it's also absolutely imperative to to be aware of and understand your client's backstory and their goals. This intersects a lot with the sentimental value of the home and the family memories, but by being fully aware of your client's history, their relationships, and their goals, we'll be better equipped to frame the importance of estate planning to the client, and also more importantly, to accomplish the client's goals. So just a few tools that are useful to understand your client's backstory and goals. So one is active listening. So we as attorneys, we're all experts in this unfair system. We know about the malicious impact it's had, but still we need to give our clients time to share and to feel heard. We need to let them individually express their feelings, express their story. And then just the client's experience. So not everyone has the same faith in the justice system. So as Nneka touched upon, well, as Nneka dove into, and as I touched upon, there's many systems that have existed since the inception of the country to extract wealth from Black communities. So it's not surprising that many of our clients are skeptical of the justice system. But we just need to keep that in mind. And then there's always just maintaining a non-judgmental attitude. So we need to know the struggle that it took to acquire the home, because it helps us better protect the home. Likewise, knowing the client's relationships to their family and friends, their ultimate goals, it helps us explain the roles of the healthcare agent, the agent in a power of attorney, and the personal representative. So estate planning it's not a one-size-fits-all process. We need to fully know the client so that the client has right vehicles in place to protect their assets and their legacy. It's important to know the client's relationships, because if they have a non-traditional family, a partner, or an unofficially adopted child, they will be overlooked without proper estate planning. Also, in regards to the client's family, if there's an estate plan in place, it promotes family unity. It's another emotional benefit to estate planning. The advanced medical director presents just one singular voice to speak with the doctor and give a decision. So if the doctors need a quick, decisive answer, there's that one unified voice to provide that answer. It takes a burden off the family members to have to choose who would decide in a time of crisis, and it's one less thing for them to worry about. So, and then just, I guess the third point I want to talk about in the framework of estate planning and racial equity is highlighting the client's agency. So Nneka provided an excellent history of the systems that have been acting against Black communities. So these systems have been acting maliciously to extract and destroy Black communities. So estate planning is not a panacea for narrowing the wealth gap. So it's not going to solve this issue on its own, but it is an important tool. And estate planning allows the client to make decisions for themselves about what's going to happen to them, their assets, and their legacy. So for example, the advanced medical directive allows the client to name someone who will handle their health decisions if they are unable to communicate. And the living will allows them to dictate specifically what level of care they want in a life situation. They can specify whether or not they want to be an organ donor, what's going to happen to their body, and any final arrangement purposes. Power of attorney allows the client to name an agent to handle everyday expenses such as rent or doctor's bills. The client has the power to name an agent to collect government benefits and handle bank transactions on their behalf and deal with the insurance companies. Also, by highlighting the client's agency, it allows us to confront, head on, this myth of estate planning only being a tool for the wealthy. So unfortunately, there's a bit of an information gap. When we go out to do outreach for the clinics, we run into that myth that estate planning is only for the uber wealthy. So if you have the house or vacation home, then estate plan is for you. But if you don't have much, if you only have the one home, then maybe estate plan is something you never considered. And like I said, this information gap, it makes sense. If your entire life you've only seen these systems damage Black communities, you would be unaware of any potential tools to try to counteract that devaluation. But ultimately, by highlighting client's agency in estate planning, we can show that estate planning is crucial for everyone. So everyone has the right to make determinations about their healthcare, the bills are going to be paid, and to decide who should receive their personal belongings. And these rights apply regardless of your income or your assets. And regardless of our client's wealth or lack of it, this also allows us to approach the fact that it can be somewhat complicated and difficult to talk about estate planning because it forces us to confront our mortality, which can be overwhelming. Also, I think it's great to take a holistic approach to highlight the client's agency. And the way I look at that is just by offering advice and assistance to the client about non-probate transfers. So vehicles to pass their assets outside of probate. So for many of our clients, probate presents an insurmountable barrier. There's just the time commitment, the 9 months, and the cost. It's just too much. It's too much of a barrier to try to overcome. So whenever possible, we try to inform the client about vehicles to pass their assets outside of probate. And for many of these assets, they can do this on their own. They can do this on their own, which further highlights their agency. So if they have life insurance or retirement funds, obviously they can name a beneficiary designation. They have a bank account or a vehicle, they can name a transfer on death or payable on death. And then focusing back on the home, if they are the owner, they can pass the property on to the future through a life estate deed, which grants future ownership of their home to remainder men. And it allows them to avoid probate because the home passes outside of probate, passes automatically to that remainder man on the client's death, but it also avoids the risk of joint ownership. So I know that some clients have tried to go in the route of adding like a child as a joint tenant with the right of survivorship. And that would allow the property to pass by operation of law to the child without the need for probate. But then it opens the property up to any potential liens from the child's creditors. With the life estate deed, because the child has future interest, the property is safe during the course. Well, the property is safe from the child's creditors during the course of the client's life. And another beneficial aspect is I touched on this a few slides ago, maybe on one of my first slides, about our clients in tangled title situations not being able to access the homeowner's property tax credit because the name's not in the deed. We have a client that's pursuing a life estate deed. They keep the name on the deed because they have a life estate, so they can still access the property tax credit, which makes their tax impact a much more feasible sum. They can access any home repair programs to keep the property in an inhabitable condition, and can access water programs as well. Back there. So just in closing, I just want to say that race and poverty have always been linked, and they remain so today. And I just want to thank you all for attending. As I said earlier, estate planning is only one piece of this puzzle, but it's very important. And it's extremely important that we, as attorneys, that we ensure that every rounder has meaningful access to the law and the justice systems. So, I mean, we understand the law. We have access and we have the technical expertise that we can lend to affect the greater good. And we have an obligation to lend our skills and access towards advancing justice and proactively supporting anti-racist policies. So I just have a few housekeeping slides. I'm just going to encourage everyone to follow us on social media. There's our Facebook, our LinkedIn, our Twitter, and our website, and our YouTube. If you are interested in taking the case, you can go to our website, to the Pro Bono portal. It's on the top right there at MVLSlaw.org. Select that, and it should look like that. And you can browse our available cases. And if you're interested in taking a case, you can select learn more. The bottom right of each little box. And so we have some upcoming trainings. So just like we have this training, we have upcoming trainings in some other areas of law. So just a list there, read those. But if you're interested, you can go to our website in the events page, /events. And just like this training is going to be recorded, we also have recordings of past trainings, which are available in all the areas of law that we assist with. And that can be accessed to our website as well. And if you're not a volunteer, I would encourage you to sign up today, and that's the link to sign up and apply to be a volunteer. And then we just have some more slides about race equity context. We've been including these in all of our trainings because we've taken a proactive approach to showing the link between poverty and race. So I've included them, but I'm not going to really go too deeply into them because I touched upon them in the actual show. So I'm gonna stop sharing. Unless you have a few chats. So I'm gonna, okay, so we have a few questions. I'll start. So one is, are there educational? So yeah, looks like it's one to panelists. I don't know if you all can see this. I'm just gonna read them. So are there educational opportunities for low income that helps in finances, taxes, insurance, and investing? So that's one resource that jumps to mind is Cash Campaign's Money Power Day. I participated in that last year, and we touched on estate planning, but I know they offer a wide range of financial literacy, taxes. So I think that would be a great resource. Maybe there's more. Open the slide. I can open it up if people want to talk. Also, we have a few people here, so I can try to make it available for you to speak and ask the questions as well. Let's see if I can do that.
Tim, if you don't mind if I jump in, Nneka's adding a few in the chat, which are good resources, but I just, this is Margaret. I was on briefly at the very beginning. If you saw me, I'm also at MVLS. I do think that it is, sometimes a common thought that if people had more educational resources, they would be in a different position. And I think that it's important to note that financial education cannot overcome all of these racial systemic barriers that we've talked about in this presentation. I think sometimes that's like a go-to, solution, but I don't think that that's the be all end all, solution to all of these issues that we've been discussing today. So I just wanted to add my take on that.
I think, yeah, wholeheartedly agree. So I made everyone's available to unmute themselves if they wish. You don't have to, but you have the power to. We have another question. Let's get one. And thank you, Nneka, for those resources. So is there a training on how to untangle heir property deeds? So we do actually. We have a recorded training called Disentangling Deeds that we put on last year. I think that's a great resource because it's pretty in depth. We go through basically deed disentanglement from opening the estate, going through estate administration, all the way through recording the deed. So drafting and recording the deed. So it's a thorough, comprehensive training. A few more. So make sure I didn't miss anything.
You didn't miss anything. I did just want to note that sometimes it's important just to think about, specifically when you're talking about Black clients, that the will can be used as a historical to create some historical continuity in terms of documenting family history, documenting who was considered to be family, because historically our traditional families include fictive kinship, and those are those relatives that are created as a result of the bond between persons, not necessarily the blood between persons. And so it's important, specifically as more African Americans start to trace their roots, right? One of the challenges that we often have is there is this missing link in the legal documents because there weren't estate plans in place. And so this is one of, like Margaret mentioned, this is a piece of a larger solution set, right? It is one of the tactics. It's not even a strategy. It's one of the tactics that can be employed in starting to create the historical record, so that those things at some point hopefully technology will get to a point where we can really trace our roots all the way through. But as a part of the physical paper, physical paper trail, and why things like a family Bible is so important. It's not just about the Bible. It is about what is written in the margins and what is written on that last page in the family tree that is uniquely important to Black people.
I'm just going to put my contact information in the chat. They'll do that in the slides. So if anyone has any questions and they want to send them out offline, I'm available as well. Okay. Well, if there are no additional questions, I'm going to just want to thank you all for attending today. I want to thank you, Nneka, for volunteering your time today and your wealth of knowledge. What you all do? Best wishes to you all.
Hi, Tim.
Yes.
Before you hang up, I just have a quick question. What are some of the outreach efforts that the community, that is either out there for the community to kind of know when they need a will? Because I find that sometimes that's the disconnect. I'm still a law student, so and this is the area I plan to go into. And what I kind of see in the community is that, necessarily people that live in inner cities, minorities, they don't necessarily see the value. When I talk to my family about estate planning, it's almost like a laughable, like, oh, well, we don't have money. Nobody left us 40 acres and a mule. So it's kind of like they don't understand that they need it. So what are there outreach efforts that you know of that kind of go out and tell people, hey, you need this, plus we have a service that can, help you with it?
So yeah, so the My Home, My Deed, My Legacy project, we started in 2019. So pre-COVID, we would go out to community associations and give presentations on estate planning. So the important documents, the need, and what they would accomplish. And those were a great tool. But since COVID, it's been a little bit more difficult. We've been doing it remotely. I know like Money Power Day moved to a remote format last year. So we were able to pre-record an outreach presentation that was shared with all the residents that attended, but it was a bit hard because of the technology gap. So the hope is, we're hoping like the summer is looking to be more available to getting back out, at least in an outdoor space, to go out into communities and basically spread the information about estate planning. I know prior to COVID, so 2019, we also had like a wide city range outreach effort where we have a website, myhomemydeed.org, that you can go to, anyone can go to and find out their name is on the deed to their property and sign up for one of our clinics where they'll meet with an attorney to go through a 1-hour consultation about estate planning, the documents, and potentially open it in the state if needs be. So we had that campaign, but we also had like a more commercial outreach program where we had like bus ads and billboards. But in COVID, it's been more remote. We've been doing some flyer drops as part of like Meals on Wheels to try to include flyers for our services to just inform realtors across the state about our services. But it's been a mix of remote and flyer drops since last March. But we're looking forward to getting back out there and going to community associations like on a weeknight and just doing a 1-hour presentation on the importance of estate planning.
Okay, thank you.
No, thank you. All right, so if there's no further questions, I'm going to, once again, thank you all for attending. I'm going to officially close the Zoom. I said this has been recorded, so it can be accessed. It'll be posted on our website to be accessed in the future. Take care.